Welcome. You've stumbled upon a hidden realm of ancient wisdom. Here, time slows to a gentle crawl. No modern distractions intrude. Only the whisper of quills on parchment and the echoes of forgotten tongues. If you're listening now, consider this your invitation to journey back. Allow your mind to quiet. Let your thoughts drift. Close your eyes if you wish. Where we're going, sight is secondary to understanding. Tonight, we'll traverse centuries to an era when grammar was not a tedious subject, but a sacred art. When young scholars huddled in candlelit monasteries, and Latin was not just a dead language, but the very key to unlocking the secrets of the universe. There are no textbooks here, no exams, just the soothing cadence of history's forgotten lessons. So settle in, let the weight of the present fall away, and float gently as we begin our exploration. In the depths of time, long before the age of instant communication and digital knowledge, there existed a world where words held power beyond measure. A world where the study of language was not merely an academic pursuit, but a spiritual journey. This was the realm of Latin grammar, a discipline that shaped the minds and souls of countless scholars for over a millennium. Imagine, if you will, the flickering light of a single candle illuminating a small, stone-walled chamber. The air is thick with the scent of ink and parchment. A young novice sits, hunched over a wooden desk, his quill scratching softly as he carefully copies out the intricate rules of Latin syntax. This is not just a lesson in language. It is a ritual, a rite of passage into the world of knowledge and divine understanding. In this forgotten era, Latin was not just another subject to be studied. It was the key that unlocked the doors to all learning. It was the language of the church, of scholarship, of law, and of medicine. To master Latin was to gain access to the accumulated wisdom of ages past, to commune with the great thinkers of antiquity, and to glimpse the very mind of God. The grammar of this ancient tongue was not a set of dry rules to be memorized, but a living, breathing system that revealed the underlying structure of thought itself. Each declension, each conjugation, was a step on a path that led to greater enlightenment. The students who devoted themselves to this study were not merely learning a language. They were training their minds to perceive the hidden patterns that governed the universe. As we delve deeper into this world, we begin to understand that the study of Latin grammar was far more than a means of communication. It was a form of meditation, a way of ordering one's thoughts and aligning oneself with the cosmic order. The careful parsing of sentences, the meticulous analysis of word forms, these were not tedious exercises, but acts of devotion. In the quiet halls of medieval monasteries and the bustling lecture rooms of ancient universities, the rhythmic chant of Latin declensions echoed like a prayer. Amo, amas, amat, the students would intone, their voices rising and falling in unison. With each repetition, they were not just memorizing verb forms. They were attuning themselves to the very pulse of creation. The masters who taught this sacred art were not mere instructors, but guardians of a profound tradition. They understood that in teaching Latin grammar, they were passing on not just a set of rules, but a way of seeing the world. Each lesson was a revelation, each text a treasure trove of hidden meanings waiting to be unlocked. As we sit here, in the hushed stillness of our imaginary scriptorium, we can almost feel the weight of centuries pressing down upon us. The ghosts of countless scholars who came before us seem to hover just beyond the edge of sight, their whispered conversations in perfect Latin syntax drifting on the air. This is a world far removed from our own, where the pursuit of knowledge was a sacred calling, and the study of grammar was a path to enlightenment. It is a world that has been lost to us, buried beneath layers of progress and change. And yet, as we immerse ourselves in this forgotten realm, we begin to sense that perhaps not all is lost. For in the careful study of Latin grammar, in the patient unraveling of complex sentences, and the precise application of linguistic rules, we find echoes of a deeper wisdom. We discover a way of thinking that transcends time and culture, a method of ordering our thoughts that can bring clarity and insight even in our chaotic modern world. So as we prepare to leave this quiet sanctuary of learning, let us carry with us a spark of that ancient fire. Let us remember that in the study of language, we touch something timeless and profound. And perhaps, in our own small way, we can keep alive the spirit of those long ago scholars who saw, in the intricacies of Latin grammar, a reflection of the divine order of the universe. Now, as our candle flickers and fades, it's time to return to the present. But the echoes of Latin declensions and the whisper of ancient wisdom will linger, a gentle reminder of the power and beauty that lies hidden in the forgotten pages of history. Let this journey be a balm for your modern soul, a moment of respite in the rush of contemporary life. And as you drift back to the present, may you carry with you a newfound appreciation for the art of grammar and the timeless pursuit of knowledge. In the hushed halls of medieval learning, where parchment whispered secrets and quills scratched out knowledge, a silent revolution unfolded. It was not a revolution of swords or crowns, but of declensions and conjugations. Latin, the tongue of scholars and saints, was not merely taught, it was woven into the very fabric of young minds. As dawn broke over the misty fields of England, boys as young as 7 would trudge through muddy lanes, their footsteps echoing the cadence of Latin verses, soon to be etched in their memories. The grammar school, often a simple stone building nestled in the shadow of a cathedral or monastery, awaited them. Here, in these austere chambers, the seeds of classical learning would be planted, nurtured, and eventually bloom into the great minds of the age. The air within these schools was thick with the dust of centuries and the murmur of countless voices reciting in unison. Amo, Amaz, Amat, the chant would begin, rising and falling like the tide of an ancient sea. This was no mere rote learning. It was an immersion in a language that held the keys to all higher knowledge. At the heart of this educational odyssey lay the Latin grammar curriculum, a rigorous system designed to mold malleable minds into vessels of classical wisdom. The journey began with the basics, the alphabet, then syllables, words, and finally, sentences. But this was merely the foundation upon which a towering edifice of learning would be built. The cornerstone of this curriculum was the Ars Minor of Aelius Donatus, a 4th century grammarian whose work would echo through the centuries. His text, concise yet comprehensive, introduced young scholars to the 8 parts of speech: noun, pronoun, verb, adverb, participle, conjunction, preposition, and interjection. These were not dry categories to be memorized, but living tools with which to dissect and understand the very structure of language itself. As students progressed, they encountered more complex texts. The Doctrinale of Alexander of Villedieu, with its 2,645 lines of hexameter verse, became both the bane and the beacon of many a young scholar. Its rhythmic lines, once mastered, provided a mnemonic framework for the intricacies of Latin grammar that would stay with students for life. But grammar was more than just rules and forms. It was the gateway to rhetoric, to logic, to the very art of thinking itself. As students grappled with ablative absolutes and gerundas, they were also learning to construct arguments, to analyze texts, to see the world through the lens of classical antiquity. The method of instruction was as ancient as it was effective. The master would read aloud a passage, explaining its grammatical structure, its rhetorical devices, its hidden meanings. Students would then copy the text, committing it to memory not just with their minds, but with the physical act of writing. This kinesthetic approach ensured that the knowledge became a part of them, as natural as breathing. Exercises in composition followed, with students crafting their own sentences and paragraphs in imitation of the great authors they studied. Cicero, Virgil, Ovid, these were not distant figures but constant companions, their words providing both inspiration and challenge. As the years passed, the curriculum expanded. Poetry was dissected for meter and meaning. Prose was analyzed for structure and style. The trivium of grammar, rhetoric, and logic intertwined, creating a foundation upon which all other learning could be built. Yet this was no ivory tower pursuit. The Latin learned in these grammar schools was a living language, used not only in the church but in law courts, in diplomatic correspondence, in scientific treatises. To master Latin was to gain entry into a world of knowledge and power that spanned continents and centuries. The discipline required was intense. Long hours of study, strict adherence to rules, and harsh punishments for errors were the norm. Yet from this crucible emerged minds sharpened and refined, ready to take their place in the intellectual elite of medieval Europe. As evening shadows lengthened across the schoolroom floor, candles would be lit, their flickering light illuminating pages of carefully copied text. Here, in these pools of golden light, future scholars, clerics, and statesmen bent their heads over their work, their lips moving silently as they committed yet another passage to memory. Outside, the world might change. Kingdoms might rise and fall. Plagues might ravage the land. But within these walls, the timeless rhythms of Latin grammar continued unabated. It was a constancy that provided both comfort and challenge, a link to a past that seemed more stable, more certain than the tumultuous present. And so, as night fell and the last student trudged home, the echoes of Latin declensions lingered in the air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new texts to master, new heights of learning to scale. But for now, in the quiet of the evening, the day's lessons settled into young minds, becoming part of the very fabric of medieval thought and culture. This was the Latin grammar curriculum, not just a subject to be studied, but a way of life, a lens through which to view the world. It was a discipline that shaped minds, forged characters, and laid the foundation for an intellectual tradition that would endure for centuries to come. In the grand tapestry of medieval education, the threads of Latin grammar were woven tightly, creating a pattern of learning that was at once beautiful and enduring. It was a pattern that would continue to influence Western thought long after the last candle in the last grammar school had flickered out. As the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, the grammar schools stirred to life. In the quiet streets of medieval towns, young boys emerged from their homes, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. They walked with purpose, some with worn shoes, others with bare feet hardened by countless journeys. The school buildings stood as humble sentinels of learning, often nestled in the shadow of a grand cathedral or tucked away beside a modest monastery. Their stone walls, weathered by time and countless seasons, held within them the promise of knowledge and the echoes of generations past. Inside these hallowed halls, a singular focus reigned supreme: The mastery of Latin. This was no mere academic exercise, but a gateway to a world of wisdom and enlightenment. The boys who entered these doors were not here to engage in casual conversation or to learn the latest fashionable phrases. Their mission was far more profound. The curriculum was a rigorous journey through the intricacies of Latin grammar. Every declension, every conjugation, every rule of syntax was a stepping stone on the path to true understanding. The air was thick with the sound of young voices reciting verb forms and noun cases, their tongues wrapping around unfamiliar sounds with growing confidence. At the heart of this linguistic odyssey lay the sacred texts. The Bible, in its Latin Vulgate form, was not just a religious tome, but a linguistic treasure trove. The boys pored over its pages, dissecting each sentence, each phrase, each word with meticulous care. They sought not just to read the words, but to unlock their deepest meanings, to grasp the nuances that lay hidden within the ancient language. But the study of Latin extended far beyond religious texts. The works of classical authors, Cicero, Virgil, Ovid, were also part of the curriculum. These texts offered a window into a world long past, filled with heroes, gods, and timeless human dramas. As the boys grappled with the complexities of Latin prose and poetry, they were also absorbing the wisdom of the ancients, learning lessons about virtue, courage, and the nature of the human spirit. The teachers, often monks or clergymen, moved among their charges with a mixture of stern discipline and patient guidance. They understood the weight of their task, to shape these young minds, to instill in them not just knowledge, but a love for learning itself. Their methods were sometimes harsh by modern standards, but they were driven by a sincere belief in the transformative power of education. As the boys progressed in their studies, they began to see Latin not just as a set of rules to be memorized, but as a living, breathing entity. They learned to appreciate its elegance, its precision, its ability to express complex ideas with clarity and grace. The language became a tool, a key that could unlock doors to new realms of understanding. Writing exercises formed a crucial part of the curriculum. The boys learned to compose in Latin, starting with simple sentences and gradually progressing to more complex compositions. They wrote essays, letters, and even attempted poetry, each exercise honing their skills and deepening their understanding of the language's structure. The act of writing in Latin was more than just a linguistic exercise. It was a way of organizing thoughts, of learning to express ideas with clarity and precision. As they struggled to find the right words, to craft sentences that flowed with logic and elegance, the boys were also learning valuable lessons about clear thinking and effective communication. The grammar school day was long and demanding. From early morning until late afternoon, the boys were immersed in their studies. Breaks were few, and distractions were not tolerated. Yet despite the rigors of their education, many of the students found a deep satisfaction in their work. There was a sense of accomplishment in mastering a difficult text, in crafting a well-turned phrase, in gradually unlocking the secrets of this ancient language. As the seasons turned, the boys' progress became evident. Those who had entered the school stumbling over basic declensions were now reading complex texts with growing confidence. They debated the finer points of grammar, engaged in spirited discussions about the meaning of obscure passages, and even began to compose their own original works in Latin. The impact of this education extended far beyond the walls of the grammar school. As these boys grew into young men, many of them went on to universities, where their mastery of Latin opened doors to higher learning in theology, law, and medicine. Others found their skills valuable in the world of commerce and diplomacy, where Latin remained the lingua franca of educated Europeans. But perhaps the most profound impact of the Latin grammar curriculum was not in its practical applications, but in the way it shaped the minds of those who studied it. The rigorous discipline, the emphasis on precision and clarity, the exposure to great works of literature and philosophy. All of these elements combined to create individuals who were not just knowledgeable, but truly educated in the broadest sense of the word. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the schoolyard, the boys gathered their materials and prepared for the journey home. They left the grammar school tired but satisfied, their minds filled with new knowledge, their spirits buoyed by the sense of progress and achievement. In the quiet of the evening, as they made their way along familiar paths, many of these young scholars found themselves silently reciting the Latin phrases they had learned that day. The ancient words echoed in their minds, a testament to the enduring power of language and learning. And as they walked, barefoot or shod, under the darkening sky, they carried with them not just the knowledge of Latin, but the seeds of a lifelong love for learning and the written word. In the dimly lit halls of medieval schools, a young student's first encounter with the world of learning was not through colorful picture books or interactive tablets, but through the austere pages of the Ars Minor. This ancient text, penned by Aelius Donatus in the 4th century, was not merely a book, it was a gateway to knowledge, a rhythmic incantation that would shape young minds for centuries to come. Parts orationis quod sunt? Octo, que, nomen, pronomen, verbum, adverbium, participium, coniunctio, prepositio, interjectio. The child's voice, hesitant at first, would grow stronger with each repetition. How many parts of speech are there? 8. Which are they? Noun, pronoun, verb, adverb, participle, conjunction, preposition, interjection. These words, alien and mysterious, would become as familiar as a lullaby, etched into memory through endless recitation. The Ars Minor was not a text to be read silently, but a chant to be intoned, a melody of grammar that would resonate through the stone walls of the schoolroom. Day after day, week after week, the students would gather, their young voices blending in a chorus of Latin declensions and conjugations. The master, stern-faced and unyielding, would lead them through the labyrinth of language, his rod ever ready to correct a misplaced accent or a forgotten ending. Nomen quid est? Pars orationis cum casu corpus aut rem propria communitur significans. What is a noun? A part of speech signifying a person or thing, properly or commonly, with a case. The words flowed, a stream of knowledge that seemed, at first, impenetrable. Yet, as the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, understanding began to dawn. The rhythm of the chant became a scaffold upon which comprehension could be built. In those early lessons, the focus was not on creativity or self-expression, but on the precise mechanics of language. The students learned to dissect sentences, to identify the building blocks of communication. They memorized lists of nouns and their declensions, verbs and their conjugations, each word a piece in the grand puzzle of Latin grammar. Casus nominum quod sunt? Sex qui? Nominativus, genitivus, dativus, accusativus, vocativus, ablativus. How many cases of nouns are there? 6. Which? Nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, vocative, ablative. The cases, with their subtle shifts in meaning and function, were a particular challenge. Each ending, Each subtle change in the form of a word carried significance. The students learned to navigate this complex system, to understand how a single alteration could transform the entire meaning of a sentence. As they progressed, the chants became more complex, the grammatical concepts more nuanced. They learned of moods and tenses, of active and passive voices, of regular and irregular forms. Each new concept was introduced not through explanation, but through repetition, through the steady rhythm of the Ars Minor. Tempora verborum quod sunt? Trier. Qua? Presens ad lego. Praeteritum ad legi futuro ad legum. How many tenses of verbs are there? 3. Which? Present, as I read. Past, as I have read. Future, as I shall read. The students chanted these words, their young minds grappling with the concept of time as expressed through language. They learned to bend verbs to their will, to express actions in the past, present, and future with precision and clarity. But the Ars Minor was more than just a tool for learning grammar. It was a key to a vast world of knowledge, a foundation upon which all further learning would be built. For in those medieval classrooms, Latin was not just another subject. It was the language of scholarship, of religion, of law and medicine. To master Latin was to gain access to the wisdom of the ages, to join a lineage of scholars stretching back to ancient Rome. As the students progressed, they began to see the patterns, to understand the logic behind the seemingly arbitrary rules. They learned to appreciate the elegance of a well-constructed sentence, the power of a perfectly chosen word. The chants of the Ars Minor became not just a memory exercise, but a way of thinking, a method of organizing and understanding the world. Participium quid est? Pars orationis partem capiens nominis, partem verbi. What is a participle? A part of speech taken part of a noun and part of a verb. In these words, the students began to see the interconnectedness of language, the way different parts of speech could blend and merge, creating new shades of meaning. They learned to use participles to create more complex, nuanced sentences, to express ideas with greater precision and elegance. The lessons were long, the work arduous. Hours would pass in the dim light of the schoolroom, the air thick with the dust of parchment and the smell of ink. Yet even as their bodies grew weary, their minds remained alert, absorbing the rhythms and patterns of the Latin language. For some, the Ars Minor would remain a distant memory, a relic of their school days. But for others, it would become a lifelong companion, a foundation upon which they would build careers in the church, in law, in medicine, in scholarship. The chants they learned as children would echo in their minds as they read ancient texts, composed legal documents, or engaged in theological debates. As the years passed, the students who had once struggled with the basic concepts of grammar found themselves able to compose complex sentences, to argue subtle points of logic, to express abstract ideas with clarity and precision. The Ars Minor had given them more than just knowledge of Latin. It had given them a way of thinking, a method of analysis that could be applied to any field of study. And so, in those medieval classrooms, through the steady rhythm of repetition, through the patient accumulation of knowledge, young minds were shaped and molded. The Ars Minor, with its litany of grammatical rules, its endless lists and categories, became a bridge between the ancient world and the medieval, a vessel carrying the wisdom of the past into the future. Coniunctio quid est? Pars orationis et nectens, ordinansk sententium. What is a conjunction? A part of speech connecting and ordering a sentence. In these simple words, The students learned not just about grammar, but about the structure of thought itself. They learned to connect ideas, to create logical arguments, to express complex relationships between concepts. The legacy of Donatus and his Ars Minor would endure for centuries, shaping the minds of countless students, influencing the development of education and scholarship throughout the medieval world and beyond. And though the methods may seem harsh to modern eyes, the results were undeniable: a generation of thinkers and scholars who could navigate the complexities of language with ease, who could access the wisdom of the ancients and build upon it to create new knowledge. In the end, the Ars Minor was more than just a grammar book. It was a key to understanding, a path to knowledge, a bridge between worlds. And for the students who chanted its words day after day, year after year, it was the first step on a lifelong journey of learning, a journey that would take them far beyond the confines of their medieval schoolrooms, into the vast and wondrous world of ideas. The classroom was silent, save for the scratching of quills and the occasional rustle of parchment. Rows of young boys sat hunched over their desks, brows furrowed in concentration as they grappled with the intricacies of Latin grammar. At the front of the room, a stern-faced master paced slowly, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of distraction or confusion. Parsing was the cornerstone of their education, the foundation upon which all other learning would be built. A single Latin sentence could occupy their minds for hours, each word a puzzle to be unlocked, each phrase a challenge to be conquered. The boys knew that their future success in the church, in law, in medicine hinged on their ability to dissect and understand the language of the ancients. One by one, the master called them forward. Each boy would stand before him, hands clasped behind his back, heart racing as he awaited the sentence that would test his knowledge and determine his fate for the day. Pars magister docet discipulus, the master intoned, his voice steady and unwavering. The chosen boy took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. He knew that every word held layers of meaning: gender, number, case, function, and that a single misstep could lead to hours of additional study or, worse, public humiliation before his peers. Magister, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Nominative singular masculine, subject of the sentence. The master nodded almost imperceptibly, encouraging him to continue. Docet, the boy pressed on, gaining confidence. Third person singular present active, indicative of docio, docere. It means he teaches. Another nod, another moment of relief. Discipulus, he finished, exhaling slowly. Accusative plural masculine, direct object of docet. The master's face remained impassive, but there was a glimmer of approval in his eyes. Very good, he said simply, before moving on to the next student. And so it went, hour after hour, day after day. The boys learned to break down complex sentences into their component parts, to recognize the subtle shifts in meaning that came with a change in ending or a different verb tense. They memorized declensions and conjugations, reciting them in their sleep and scribbling them on scraps of parchment during their rare moments of free time. The discipline was rigid, the expectations high. Mistakes were met with silence or repetition, never with cruelty. The masters understood that learning was a process, that mastery came through patience and persistence. They pushed their students hard, but always with the underlying current of compassion, a belief in the potential of each young mind entrusted to their care. For some, the endless parsing and analysis was a source of frustration, a seemingly pointless exercise in memorization and regurgitation. But for others, It was a gateway to a world of knowledge and understanding. They began to see the patterns in the language, to appreciate the elegance and precision of Latin expression. They discovered that by breaking down a sentence, they could unlock its deepest meanings, uncovering layers of nuance and subtlety that might otherwise remain hidden. As the weeks turned to months, and the months to years, the boys found themselves transformed. What had once been a struggle became second nature. They could parse complex sentences with ease, their minds moving swiftly from word to word, function to function. They began to read the great works of Roman literature, Virgil, Cicero, Ovid, not just as exercises in grammar, but as windows into a world of ideas and emotions that spanned the centuries. But the path to this mastery was not without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, of frustration, of sheer exhaustion. Late nights spent poring over texts by candlelight, eyes straining to make out the faded ink on ancient manuscripts. Mornings when they stumbled into the classroom, minds foggy with fatigue, only to be confronted with a particularly thorny passage from Tacitus or a convoluted construction from Livy. Yet even in these moments of struggle, there was a sense of purpose, a shared commitment to the pursuit of knowledge. The boys supported one another, forming study groups and sharing mnemonic devices to help remember particularly tricky grammatical rules. They celebrated each other's successes and commiserated over their failures, bound together by the common experience of grappling with a language that was both frustratingly complex and breathtakingly beautiful. The masters, too, played their part in this journey of discovery. Behind their stern exteriors lay a deep well of knowledge and a genuine desire to see their students succeed. They knew when to push and when to offer encouragement, when to demand more and when to allow for a moment of rest. Their methods might have seemed harsh to outsiders, but to those within the system, they were a necessary part of the learning process, a way of honing minds and building character. As the boys progressed in their studies, they began to see the world through new eyes. The Latin they had struggled so hard to master became a key that unlocked doors to other languages, other cultures. They found echoes of it in French and Italian, in Spanish and Portuguese. They recognized its influence in English, in the scientific and legal terms that shaped their understanding of the world around them. More than just a language, Latin became a way of thinking, a method of approaching problems and analyzing information. The skills they had developed through endless hours of parsing and translation, attention to detail, logical reasoning, the ability to see connections between seemingly disparate elements, served them well in all aspects of their lives. And so, as they stood before their masters, no longer trembling but confident in their abilities, they understood that the journey had been worth every moment of struggle. They had not just learned the language. They had been given the tools to understand the world, to engage with the great thinkers of the past, and to add their own voices to the ongoing conversation of human knowledge. The classroom may have been silent, the discipline rigid, but within that structure, minds had flourished and spirits had soared. Parsing had been more than just an academic exercise. It had been a path to enlightenment, a way of unlocking the secrets of language and, through it, the secrets of the human experience itself. As they left the classroom for the final time, stepping out into a world that awaited their knowledge and skills, the boys carried with them not just the ability to parse a Latin sentence, but the confidence to parse the complexities of life itself. They had been given a gift beyond measure, one that would continue to shape their lives and the lives of those they touched for years to come. The Psalter, a cornerstone of Latin education, breathed life into the ancient tongue. More than mere scripture, it served as a gateway to language mastery, a rhythmic mirror reflecting the cadence of prayer and the structure of thought. In the hallowed halls of medieval learning, young scholars pored over the Psalms, their fingers tracing the lines of sacred text. Each verse became a lesson in translation, a key to unlocking the mysteries of Latin grammar. The Psalter was not just a religious text. It was a linguistic treasure trove, a living, breathing curriculum. Beatus ver, qui non abiet in concilio impiorum. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked. These words, the opening of Psalm 1, were more than a moral lesson. They were a portal to understanding, a first step in a journey through the intricacies of Latin syntax. As students chanted the Psalms, they absorbed not only the meaning, but the very essence of the language. The rhythmic flow of the verses etched patterns into their minds, creating a framework for comprehension that extended far beyond rote memorization. It was a holistic approach to learning, where meaning and structure intertwined seamlessly. The Psalter's role in education was multifaceted. It served as a primer for reading, a guide for pronunciation, and a model for composition. Each psalm offered a unique linguistic landscape, rich with metaphors and poetic devices that challenged and inspired young minds. Consider Psalm 23, a beloved passage known even to those unfamiliar with Latin. Dominus regit me, et nihil mihi dirit. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In these simple words lay a world of grammatical complexity. The present tense of regit, the dative of mihi, the future of dirit, all these elements combined to create a tapestry of language that students could unravel and study. But the Psalter was more than a collection of grammatical exercises. It was a mirror reflecting the deepest human emotions and experiences. Joy, sorrow, fear, and hope all found expression in its verses. As students grappled with the text, they not only improved their Latin, but also engaged with timeless questions of faith and existence. The practice of reciting psalms aloud was central to this educational approach. The sound of Latin, its rises and falls, its stresses and pauses, became ingrained in the ear. This auditory learning complemented the visual study of the text, creating a multi-sensory experience that enhanced retention and understanding. Teachers guided their pupils through the Psalter with care, unraveling its complexities layer by layer. They pointed out the nuances of verb tenses, the subtleties of case endings, the power of word order. Each grammatical feature was not just a rule to be memorized, but a tool for expression, a way to convey meaning with precision and beauty. As students progressed, they began to see patterns emerge. The parallelism so characteristic of Hebrew poetry, preserved in the Latin translations, offered insights into the structure of thought itself. They learned to recognize and appreciate the artistry of language, the way words could be arranged to create emphasis, contrast, or harmony. The Psalter also served as a bridge between the sacred and the secular. While its primary purpose was religious, its linguistic richness made it an invaluable tool for those pursuing broader studies. The skills honed through psalm study transferred readily to other Latin texts, from classical literature to legal documents. In monasteries and cathedral schools, the Psalter was a constant companion. Monks and clerics recited the entire book on a regular cycle, immersing themselves in its language and wisdom. This constant exposure reinforced their Latin skills while deepening their spiritual lives, a perfect synthesis of intellectual and religious pursuits. For many medieval students, The Psalms were their first encounter with poetry. The vivid imagery, the powerful emotions, the rhythmic flow. All these elements combined to create an indelible impression. As they matured in their studies, they carried this early exposure with them, influencing their own writing and thinking. The practice of glossing, adding explanatory notes to the text, further enhanced the Psalter's educational value. These annotations, often in the vernacular, provided additional context and clarification. They served as a bridge between Latin and the student's native tongue, facilitating deeper understanding and more nuanced translation. As students advanced, they were encouraged to compose their own psalm-like verses. This exercise in imitation allowed them to apply the grammatical principles they had learned, to experiment with rhythm and meter, and to express their own thoughts in the elevated language of Scripture. The Psalter's influence extended beyond the classroom. Its language permeated medieval culture, appearing in literature, art, and everyday speech. Phrases from the Psalms became proverbial, their wisdom distilled into memorable Latin maxims that educated and uneducated alike could quote and apply. In the grand tapestry of medieval education, the Psalter stood out as a thread of gold, weaving together language, faith, and culture. It was more than a text to be studied. It was a living tradition, passed down through generations, each finding in its ancient words new relevance and meaning. As we reflect on this educational legacy, we see that the Psalter offered more than linguistic instruction. It provided a framework for understanding the world, a vocabulary for expressing the inexpressible, and a connection to a tradition that stretched back millennia. In its verses, students found not just grammar and vocabulary, but wisdom and beauty that transcended time. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." These words, so familiar, so simple, yet so profound, encapsulate the power of the Psalter. In learning to read, translate, and understand them, medieval students embarked on a journey that would shape their minds, their faith, and their very identities. The Psalter was not just a book. It was a key to unlocking the treasures of language, thought, and spirit. The Latin grammar masters stood as silent sentinels, guardians of a world built on the foundations of language and order. Their presence was not imposing, nor their methods severe. They were the quiet observers, the keepers of knowledge passed down through generations. In the hallowed halls of medieval learning, these grammar masters, often clad in the simple robes of monastic life, had once occupied the very seats their students now filled. They understood the journey, for they had walked the path themselves. Their eyes, keen and watchful, scanned the room with a mixture of patience and expectation. The grammaticus, as they were known, embodied both the scholar's wisdom and the shepherd's care. They were entrusted with a sacred duty to preserve and nurture the very soul of language. Their realm was one of ink-stained parchment and carefully crafted rules, a world where words held power and meaning was sacred. As the sun's rays filtered through the narrow windows of the scriptorium, casting long shadows across the worn stone floors, the grammar masters began their daily ritual. With measured steps, they moved among their charges, their presence a reminder of the weight of tradition and the importance of their shared task. The air was thick with the scent of vellum and candle wax, the silence broken only by the soft scratching of quills and the occasional murmur of a student grappling with a particularly challenging declension. Here, in this sanctuary of learning, the Latin language lived and breathed, its intricate structures unfolding like a map to the treasures of ancient wisdom. The grammar masters knew that their role extended far beyond mere instruction. They were the custodians of a legacy, the bridge between the great minds of antiquity and the eager scholars of the present. Their teachings were not simply about words and rules. They were about unlocking the doors to understanding, to eloquence, to the very essence of human thought and expression. With gentle hands, they guided their pupils through the labyrinth of Latin grammar. Each noun, each verb, each carefully constructed sentence was a step on the path to mastery. The grammar masters understood that true learning came not from rote memorization, but from a deep, intuitive grasp of the language's underlying principles. They watched as their students struggled and triumphed, stumbled and rose again. In each faltering attempt, in each moment of sudden comprehension, the grammar masters saw echoes of their own journey. They knew the frustration of grappling with irregular verbs, the joy of deciphering a complex text, the slow but steady growth of confidence and skill. Their methods were not flashy or revolutionary. They did not seek to dazzle or intimidate. Instead, they relied on the time-tested tools of patience, repetition, and careful guidance. They knew that true mastery of Latin grammar was not achieved overnight, but through years of dedicated study and practice. As guardians of this linguistic realm, the grammar masters were acutely aware of the power they wielded. Latin was not just a language. It was the key to a vast treasury of knowledge. It was the language of the church, of scholarship, of diplomacy. To master Latin was to gain entry into a world of ideas and opportunities that stretched far beyond the monastery walls. Yet even as they imparted this knowledge, the grammar masters remained humble. They saw themselves not as the source of wisdom, but as its conduits. Their role was to open doors, to light the way, to nurture the spark of understanding in each of their students. In the quiet moments between lessons, when the scriptorium fell silent and the candles burned low, the grammar masters would often reflect on their calling. They saw themselves as links in a great chain, stretching back to the grammarians of ancient Rome and forward into an uncertain future. Their task was not just to preserve the language, but to ensure its continued vitality and relevance. They knew that the world beyond their cloistered walls was changing. New ideas, new languages, new ways of thinking were emerging. Yet they remained steadfast in their belief in the enduring value of Latin grammar. For in its precise rules and elegant structures, they saw a reflection of the divine order of the universe. As the years passed, the grammar masters watched generation after generation of students come and go. Some would go on to become scholars in their own right. Others would enter the church or serve in royal courts. But all carried with them the indelible mark of their Latin education, a foundation that would shape their thinking and their lives. The grammar masters took quiet pride in their work, not for personal glory, but for the knowledge that they were preserving something precious. In each carefully parsed sentence, in each meticulously declined noun, they saw the continuation of a tradition that had survived the fall of empires and the turning of ages. As twilight fell and the last students filed out of the scriptorium, the grammar masters would often linger. In the gathering darkness, surrounded by the tools of their trade-worn books, well-used quills, pots of ink, they felt a deep sense of connection to all those who had come before and all who would follow. They were the quiet watchers, the guardians of a world made of ink and rule. And in their patient, steadfast dedication, they ensured that the light of learning would continue to burn bright, illuminating the path for generations to come. In the dim light of dawn, young scholars gathered, their minds still foggy with sleep. The air hung heavy with anticipation, as they prepared for another day of rigorous study. Latin, the language of ancient Rome, was their constant companion, a demanding mistress that required unwavering devotion. For hours each day, students recited. The rhythmic cadence of their voices filled the austere halls, a chorus of memorization that echoed through the centuries. They were not taught why Latin worked, as it did only how. The intricacies of grammar, the nuances of declensions, and the labyrinth of conjugations were drilled into their minds with relentless precision. Understanding would come slowly, like sunrise over frost. The first glimmers of comprehension would often appear unexpectedly, a sudden clarity amidst the fog of rote learning. For some, it was a moment of epiphany, a brief glimpse into the elegant structure of the language. For others, it remained elusive, a distant horizon always just out of reach. The curriculum was unforgiving, a rigid framework that left little room for creativity or exploration. Texts were dissected, analyzed, and committed to memory with mechanical efficiency. The beauty of poetry and prose was often lost in the relentless pursuit of grammatical perfection. Yet even in this sterile environment, the human spirit found ways to flourish. Some never questioned the methods, accepting the grueling routine as a necessary path to knowledge. They found comfort in the predictability, the clear expectations, and the measurable progress. These diligent souls became the guardians of tradition, preserving the ancient language with unwavering dedication. Others ... wrote poems in secret margins. In the spaces between prescribed exercises, forbidden verses bloomed like wildflowers in a manicured garden. These clandestine acts of creation were small rebellions against the tyranny of rote learning. The mind, even when chained to routine, still dreamed. As the days stretched into weeks and months, the students' understanding of Latin deepened, not through explanation, but through immersion. They began to sense the patterns, to feel the rhythm of the language in their bones. It was a slow awakening, a gradual unveiling of the linguistic tapestry that had been woven into the fabric of their minds. The classroom became a crucible where young minds were forged in the fires of repetition and discipline. The constant recitation created a shared experience, a bond among the students that transcended words. They found solidarity in their struggles, encouragement in their shared triumphs. Yet, beneath the surface of conformity, individual personalities began to emerge. Some students developed a knack for spotting grammatical subtleties, while others excelled at memorizing vast passages of text. These small distinctions became sources of pride, tiny rebellions against the uniformity imposed by the curriculum. As the seasons changed outside the classroom windows, so too did the students' relationship with Latin. What began as a foreign tongue slowly transformed into a familiar companion. The once incomprehensible sounds began to carry meaning, the abstract rules coalescing into a coherent system. The teachers, stern guardians of knowledge, watched this transformation with a mixture of satisfaction and detachment. Their role was not to nurture creativity or foster a love of language, but to ensure the accurate transmission of ancient wisdom. They were the custodians of a tradition that stretched back millennia, and they carried this responsibility with solemn gravity. In the quiet moments between lessons, some students dared to wonder about the world beyond the classroom walls. They imagined the streets of ancient Rome, the forums echoing with impassioned debates, the theaters alive with the power of oratory. These fleeting daydreams were quickly suppressed, but they left an indelible mark on young imaginations. The curriculum marched on, relentless in its demands. Each day brought new challenges, new texts to conquer, new grammatical mountains to scale. The students' minds expanded to accommodate the growing body of knowledge, stretching and adapting like saplings reaching for the sun. As their mastery grew, so did their appreciation for the intricacies of Latin. What once seemed arbitrary began to reveal its underlying logic. The language became a puzzle to be solved, a code to be cracked. For some, this intellectual challenge became a source of genuine excitement, a spark that would ignite a lifelong passion for linguistics. Yet, even as their skills improved, the students remained acutely aware of how much they had yet to learn. The vastness of Latin literature loomed before them, an ocean of knowledge that seemed impossible to fully explore. This realization was both humbling and inspiring, driving them to push beyond their perceived limitations. In rare moments of reflection, some students pondered the purpose of their studies. What role would this ancient language play in their future lives? How would the hours spent in recitation shape their minds and characters? These questions lingered, unanswered but ever present, adding depth to their academic journey. As the chapter of their Latin education drew to a close, the students found themselves transformed. They had entered as novices, stumbling over unfamiliar words and struggling with alien concepts. They emerged with a newfound confidence, their minds sharpened by years of rigorous study. The final days of the term brought a bittersweet mixture of relief and nostalgia. The familiar routines that had once seemed oppressive now held a certain comfort. The shared experiences, the triumphs and failures, the secret rebellions and public conformities, all had woven together to create a tapestry of memories that would last a lifetime. As they prepared to leave the classroom for the last time, many students felt a surge of gratitude for the knowledge they had gained. The Latin grammar curriculum, for all its rigidity, had given them a foundation that would serve them well in their future endeavors. They had learned not just a language, but a way of thinking, a method of analysis that could be applied to any intellectual pursuit. And so, as they stepped out into the world beyond, these young scholars carried with them more than just conjugations and declensions. They carried the discipline of daily practice, the patience to unravel complex ideas, and the resilience to persevere in the face of challenges. The Latin grammar curriculum had shaped not just their minds, but their characters. For some, the journey was just beginning. The seeds of curiosity planted in those long hours of study would blossom into lifelong pursuits. Others would move on to different fields, but would always carry with them the lessons learned in that austere classroom. As the sun set on their time as Latin students, a new chapter beckoned. The world awaited, full of possibilities and challenges. The cathedral schools had become bastions of grammatical study, their halls echoing with the rhythmic chants of Latin declensions, the echoes of those countless hours of study. Curriculum would resonate through their lives, through Donatu's a testament works, to the enduring stretched power far of education, beyond, weaving through the intricate tapestries of Priscian and the Doctrinale. These were no longer mere textbooks, but dense, poetic grammars that challenged the mind and spirit alike. Logic and verse intertwined, creating a labyrinth of language that students were expected to navigate with growing skill and confidence. The study of Latin had evolved into a complex art form, demanding not just rote memorization, but a deep understanding of linguistic structures and their philosophical underpinnings. In the cathedral schools, young scholars would rise before dawn, their minds already racing with the day's grammatical challenges. The cool stone walls of the classroom would gradually warm as sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, illuminating well-worn copies of Priscian's Institution's Grammaticae. This monumental work, spanning 18 books, had become the cornerstone of advanced Latin study. Priscian's approach was comprehensive, delving into the minutiae of Latin phonology, morphology, and syntax. Students would spend years grappling with his intricate explanations, parsing sentences with a level of detail that would astound modern linguists. The master would pace the room, his voice rising and falling as he expounded on the finer points of ablative absolutes and gerundives. But Priscian was just the beginning. As students progressed, they would encounter the Doctrinale, a metrical grammar composed by Alexander of Villadieu. This innovative text presented the rules of Latin grammar in verse form, its hexameters designed to aid memorization and comprehension. The lilting cadence of the Doctrinale would become a familiar soundtrack to the students' days, its rhythms echoing in their minds long after the candles had been extinguished. The integration of logic into grammatical study marked a significant shift in the medieval curriculum. No longer was it sufficient to simply know the rules. Students were now expected to understand the underlying principles and apply them with precision. Debates would erupt over the nature of parts of speech, the relationship between words and concepts, and the very essence of language itself. As the complexity of grammatical study increased, so too did the demands placed upon the students. They were expected to compose their own Latin verses, crafting elegant phrases that adhered to both grammatical rules and poetic conventions. The most talented among them might even attempt to create their own grammatical treatises, building upon the foundations laid by their illustrious predecessors. The cathedral schools became crucibles of linguistic excellence, forging scholars who could wield Latin with the precision of a master craftsman. The language was no longer just a means of communication. It had become a key to unlocking the wisdom of the ancients, a tool for sharpening the mind, and a medium for expressing the most profound truths of the medieval world. Yet for all its complexity, the ultimate goal of this rigorous grammatical education remained clarity. At the heart of the labyrinth, past the twisting corridors of declensions and the echoing chambers of subjunctive clauses, lay a profound understanding of language itself. Those who emerged from this intellectual maze found themselves equipped with a linguistic prowess that transcended mere communication. The cathedral curriculum was not for the faint of heart. Many students faltered, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of material to be mastered. But for those who persevered, the rewards were immeasurable. They gained not just proficiency in Latin, but a deep appreciation for the power of language to shape thought and convey meaning with exquisite precision. As the years passed, the reputation of the cathedral schools grew. Scholars from across Europe flocked to these centers of learning, eager to immerse themselves in the rigorous study of grammar. The curriculum continued to evolve, incorporating new texts and methodologies, always pushing the boundaries of linguistic understanding. The impact of this educational revolution extended far beyond the walls of the cathedral schools. The scholars who emerged from these institutions went on to shape the intellectual landscape of medieval Europe. They became teachers, theologians, and philosophers, their mastery of Latin allowing them to engage with the great works of antiquity and contribute to the growing body of medieval scholarship. The study of grammar in the cathedral schools was not merely an academic exercise. It was a transformative experience that shaped the minds and souls of its students. The discipline required to master the intricacies of Latin, grammar instilled a rigor of thought that permeated all aspects of intellectual life. The ability to construct and deconstruct complex arguments, to analyze the nuances of language, and to express ideas with clarity and precision became hallmarks of the medieval scholar. As the sun set on the 12th century, The cathedral schools stood as beacons of grammatical excellence, their influence radiating across the intellectual landscape of Europe. The curriculum they had developed would continue to evolve, adapting to new discoveries and changing philosophical paradigms. But at its core, the study of Latin grammar remained a journey into the heart of language itself, a quest for clarity amidst the complexity of human expression. The legacy of this grammatical revolution would endure for centuries, shaping the way language was studied, taught, and understood. The labyrinth of Latin grammar, with its twisting paths and hidden chambers, had become a proving ground for the sharpest minds of the age. And at its center, as it had always been, was the promise of clarity, a clarity that illuminated not just the intricacies of language, but the very nature of thought itself. Learning Latin in the cathedral schools of the 12th century was indeed like entering a labyrinth. But those who navigated its complexities emerged with a profound understanding of language, logic, and the power of clear expression. They carried with them the keys to unlock the wisdom of the past and the tools to shape the intellectual future of Europe. In the end, it was this clarity, hard-won through years of rigorous study, that would become the lasting legacy of the cathedral curriculum. Grammar was not just for scholars, it was for salvation. To interpret scripture, to compose a hymn, to grasp the nuances of doctrine. The Church's authority was rooted in language as much as in faith. To master grammar was to unlock the gates of heaven and earth. In the medieval world, Latin grammar stood as the cornerstone of education, a sacred key that opened doors to both spiritual enlightenment and worldly power. The Church, recognizing the profound importance of language, wove grammar into the very fabric of religious life and societal structure. Latin was the lingua franca of the educated elite, the vessel through which divine wisdom and earthly knowledge flowed. It was the language of God, of angels, of saints and scholars. To speak Latin was to commune with the eternal, to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine. The grammar curriculum was not merely a set of rules and exercises. It was a transformative journey, shaping minds and souls for higher purposes. Young clerics and aspiring leaders immersed themselves in the intricacies of declensions and conjugations, not as dry academic pursuits, but as sacred rituals that would elevate their spirits and sharpen their intellects. In monasteries and cathedral schools, the study of grammar was infused with religious fervor. Each noun declined was a step closer to understanding the nature of creation. Every verb conjugated was a prayer, an affirmation of the order and beauty inherent in God's design. The Church Fathers had long recognized the power of language. St. Augustine, in his De Doctrina Christiana, emphasized the importance of grammar in interpreting Scripture. He argued that a thorough understanding of language was essential for unlocking the deeper meanings hidden within sacred texts. This philosophy permeated the medieval curriculum. Students pored over ancient texts, not just to learn vocabulary and syntax, but to absorb the wisdom of the ages. The works of Virgil and Cicero were studied alongside the Psalms and Gospels, creating a rich tapestry of classical and Christian learning. Grammar was seen as a tool for moral instruction as well. A careful analysis of texts allowed students to discern right from wrong, to recognize virtue and vice in the characters they encountered. Through grammar, young minds were molded to embody the ideals of Christian living. The Church's emphasis on grammar extended beyond the classroom. In the scriptorium, monks labored over manuscripts, preserving and transmitting knowledge through the ages. Their work required not just faith and dedication, but a deep understanding of language and its nuances. In the chanceries of kings and bishops, clerks wielded grammar as a tool of statecraft. The ability to craft precise, elegant Latin was a mark of authority and legitimacy. Laws were written, treaties negotiated, and royal decrees issued in the language of the Church, binding the secular and spiritual realms together. The power of grammar was not lost on the common people. While most could not read or write Latin, they recognized its significance. The sonorous tones of the Mass, the carefully chosen words of a sermon, all spoke to the majesty and mystery of faith. Grammar elevated the ordinary to the sublime, transforming simple bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ through the power of words. Yet grammar was not without its controversies. Debates raged over the proper interpretation of texts, the correct usage of terms. Heretics were often accused of twisting grammar to suit their own ends, while Orthodox theologians claimed to be the true guardians of linguistic purity. The study of grammar also opened doors to new ideas and perspectives. As scholars delved deeper into ancient texts, they encountered philosophies and worldviews that sometimes challenged church doctrine. The Renaissance and Reformation would later build upon this foundation, using the tools of grammar to question and reinterpret long-held beliefs. Throughout the medieval period, the Church maintained its grip on grammar, seeing it as both a tool for spreading the faith and a means of controlling access to knowledge. To be literate in Latin was to hold the keys to power, both spiritual and temporal. The grammar curriculum evolved over time, adapting to new discoveries and changing needs. But its core purpose remained constant: to train minds for service to God and man, to cultivate leaders who could navigate the complexities of both heavenly and earthly realms. In the end, grammar was more than a subject to be studied. It was a way of seeing the world, of ordering chaos into meaning, of finding patterns in the seemingly random. It was a reflection of the divine order, a glimpse into the mind of God. To master grammar was to ascend the ladder of creation, to approach the ineffable truths that lay beyond human comprehension. It was a journey of the mind and soul, a pilgrimage through words to the very source of all wisdom. The legacy of this approach to grammar would echo through the centuries, shaping Western education and thought long after the medieval world had faded. Its influence can still be felt today, in the reverence for language and the belief in its power to transform lives and societies. Grammar was not just for the classroom. It was for eternity. To parse a sentence, to craft an argument, to glimpse the divine order, the Church's legacy was inscribed in words as much as in stone. To study grammar was to participate in the ongoing creation of the world. In the margins of ancient Latin grammars, whispers of forgotten lives linger. Faded ink traces the outlines of fantastical beasts, sailing ships, and half-remembered phrases. These are not mere scribbles, but echoes of young minds seeking respite from the rigors of declensions and conjugations. Here, in the negative space between rules of syntax, we glimpse the true nature of those who came before us. Not just scholars, but children with skinned elbows and frost-bitten fingers. Their Latin was more than just a subject to be mastered. It was a portal to another world. As we turn the yellowed pages, we could almost hear the scratch of quill on parchment, the hushed giggles of boys sharing a joke in a long-dead tongue. These marginal drawings and notes are not distractions from learning, but proof of its vitality. For in these small acts of rebellion against the stern face of academia, we see the human spirit persevering. The Latin grammar was their taskmaster, but also their canvas, their playground, their escape. In each carefully rendered sketch of a mythical creature or hastily scrawled bit of schoolyard slang, we witness the collision of duty and imagination. These students were not just vessels to be filled with knowledge, but active participants in their own education. Their doodles speak of dreams beyond the classroom walls, of adventures yearned for and worlds unexplored. A crudely drawn ship might represent a longing for far-off shores, while a Latin pun reveals a mind delighting in the plasticity of language. We must remember that these were not dusty academics, but living, breathing youths with hopes and fears not so different from our own. Their hands, stained with ink and calloused from writing, were the same hands that threw snowballs in winter and plucked apples in autumn. The Latin they studied was not just a dead language, but a living bridge to the past and a key to understanding their present. It was both their burden and their liberation, a strict discipline that paradoxically allowed their minds to soar. As we examine these marginalia, we are reminded that education is not a one-way street. It is a dialogue between teacher and student, between the past and the present, between what is known and what is yet to be discovered. These boys, long since turned to dust, speak to us still through their playful annotations. They remind us that learning is not just about absorbing information, but about engaging with it, challenging it, and making it our own. In the margins of their textbooks, we find not just doodles, but dreams. Not just scribbles, but the seeds of future scholars, poets, and thinkers. Each tiny drawing is a window into a world where Latin was not just a subject, but a way of seeing and understanding the universe. We can imagine them huddled over their books by candlelight, quills poised to capture not just the words of their lessons, but the flights of their fancy. In one corner, a dragon breathes fire onto a conjugation table. In another, a brave knight battles the monstrous ablative absolute. These marginal artworks are more than mere decoration. They are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In the face of rote memorization and strict grammatical rules, these students found ways to express their individuality and creativity. Their Latin studies were a form of mental discipline, yes, but also a form of play. In declining nouns and parsing verbs, they were not just learning a language, but learning how to think, how to see patterns, how to make connections between ideas. And in their secret jokes and coded messages, we see the beginnings of a scholarly camaraderie that would last a lifetime. These shared moments of levity in the midst of serious study forged bonds that transcended the classroom. The margins of their grammar books became a kind of shared secret space, a place where the rigid structures of Latin gave way to the fluid possibilities of imagination. Here, the formal language of Caesar and Cicero mingled freely with the vernacular of the schoolyard. In these doodles and annotations, we see the first stirrings of what would become lifelong passions. A carefully drawn map in the corner of a page might be the work of a future explorer. A precisely rendered diagram of a plant could be the early efforts of a botanist in the making. These marginal artworks serve as a reminder that education is not just about filling minds with facts, but about nurturing curiosity and fostering creativity. The best teachers have always known this, encouraging their students to engage with the material in personal and meaningful ways. As we study these ancient grammar books, we are not just learning about Latin, but about the nature of learning itself. We see how knowledge is not simply transferred from teacher to student, but actively constructed through engagement and play. The boys who left these traces behind were not just passive recipients of information, but active creators of meaning. Their doodles and notes show us how they grappled with complex ideas, making them their own through humor, art, and wordplay. In the margins of these old books, we find a kind of time capsule, preserving not just the formal lessons of the past, but the lived experience of learning. We see the struggles, the triumphs, the moments of boredom and flashes of inspiration that make up the true curriculum of any education. These marginalia remind us that learning is not just a mental exercise, but a deeply physical and emotional experience. The cramped hands, the ink-stained fingers, the furrowed brows of concentration, all are part of the process of internalizing knowledge. And in the end, it is perhaps these informal additions to the text that teach us the most valuable lessons. They show us that true learning is not about perfect recitation, but about making connections, asking questions, and finding joy in the process of discovery. The Latin grammar was their taskmaster, yes, but also their playground. It was a world of rules to be mastered, but also a world of possibilities to be explored. In conjugating verbs and declining nouns, these students were not just learning a language, but learning how to think, how to create, how to be. As we close these ancient books, the echoes of long-ago laughter still seem to linger in the air. The margins of memory are filled with more than just doodles. They are filled with the vibrant, messy, beautiful process of growing up and making sense of the world. In the end, it is not the perfect translations or flawless recitations that we remember, but these small acts of creativity and rebellion. For in these margins, we find not just the history of Latin education, but the enduring spirit of youth itself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Latin grammar books were gently closed. The day's lessons faded into the background, giving way to the quiet rhythms of evening routines. In the stillness of twilight, the echoes of declensions and conjugations lingered, like whispers carried on a gentle breeze. The classroom, once alive with the cadence of Latin phrases, now stood silent. Yet the language did not truly depart. It clung to the air, a ghostly presence that permeated the very walls. The students, their minds still buzzing with the day's teachings, carried the ancient tongue with them as they dispersed to their various evening activities. In the dormitories, young scholars prepared for bed, their lips moving silently as they recited vocabulary in the dim lamplight. The words danced in their minds, forming connections and patterns that would solidify in their sleep. Latin, it seemed, did not adhere to the constraints of waking hours. Outside, the monastery grounds were bathed in the soft glow of dusk. Monks moved quietly through the cloisters, their footsteps a gentle percussion to the melody of evening prayers. Even in their devotions, traces of Latin wove through their thoughts, a testament to the language's enduring presence in their lives. As night fell, the scriptorium stood empty, save for a lone scribe hunched over a manuscript. His quill scratched softly against parchment, forming letters that bridged the gap between ancient Rome and medieval Europe. In this sacred space, Latin lived on, preserved in ink and vellum for generations to come. The refectory, too, bore witness to the day's linguistic endeavors. During the evening meal, conversations were punctuated with Latin phrases, seamlessly interwoven with the vernacular. It was a reminder that the language was not merely an academic pursuit, but a living, breathing entity that shaped their world. In the infirmary, a novice tended to an ailing brother, reciting healing prayers in Latin. The words, imbued with centuries of tradition, seemed to carry a power beyond mere sound. They were a balm to both body and soul, a connection to a greater continuity of knowledge and faith. As the night deepened, the abbey bell tolled, calling the community to Compline. The brothers gathered in the chapel, their voices rising in unison as they chanted the final prayers of the day. Latin flowed from their lips with practiced ease, a river of sound that carried their devotions heavenward. In the silence that followed, the day's lessons continued to resonate. The grammar rules and vocabulary lists that had filled the hours now settled into the subconscious minds of the learners. Dreams would be peppered with declensions, verb tenses dancing through the night like ethereal spirits. The dormitories grew quiet as sleep claimed its charges. Yet even in slumber, the influence of Latin persisted. Minds, unburdened by the constraints of wakefulness, played with the language in new and creative ways. Connections formed, insights blossomed, and understanding deepened in the fertile soil of rest. In the scriptorium, the lone scribe finally set down his quill. He gazed at the words before him, a tapestry of language that connected past, present, and future. With reverence, he closed the manuscript, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and discoveries in the realm of Latin grammar. The night watch began their rounds, their soft footfalls echoing through the stone corridors. In whispered Latin, they exchanged greetings and updates, their words a thread of continuity in the fabric of monastic life. The language, even in these quiet hours, remained a vital part of their existence. As midnight approached, the abbey settled into a deep stillness. Yet the day's lessons had not truly ended. They had merely transformed. Latin, like a living entity, continued to grow and evolve within the minds and hearts of those who studied it. In the library, rows of books stood sentinel in the darkness. Their pages held the wisdom of ages, waiting to be explored anew with each dawn. The Latin texts, from ancient classics to modern treatises, were a bridge across time, connecting generations of scholars in an unbroken chain of learning. The gardens, too, bore witness to the enduring nature of Latin. Plants with names rooted in the ancient language swayed gently in the night breeze, a living lexicon that connected the natural world to the realm of scholarly pursuit. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the cycle prepared to begin anew. Soon, the community would rise, ready to immerse themselves once more in the intricacies of Latin grammar. But for now, in these quiet hours, the language rested, a constant presence that permeated every aspect of their lives. The end of the lesson was not truly an end, but a pause, a moment of reflection before the next day's journey into the depths of language. Latin, with its rich history and enduring influence, would continue to shape minds and hearts long after the classroom fell silent. As the first birds began their morning songs, the world stood poised on the threshold of a new day. The Latin grammar curriculum, far from being confined to daylight hours, had woven itself into the very fabric of existence. It was a living, breathing entity that transcended the boundaries of time and space. In the pre-dawn stillness, the words of yesterday's lessons stirred, ready to bloom anew with the rising sun. Latin did not fade with the night. It pulsed quietly, like the heartbeat of knowledge itself, ever present and eternal. The Latin grammar curriculum, a cornerstone of classical education, left an indelible mark on generations of students. Though many would never write again in Latin, what they learned remained: structure, discipline, the deep, quiet satisfaction of mastering something invisible. In the grammar of Latin, they found more than language, they found thought. The rigorous study of Latin grammar shaped minds and molded characters. It was not merely about declensions and conjugations, but about the very essence of language itself. Students grappled with complex sentence structures, unraveling the intricacies of a tongue that had long ceased to be spoken in daily life. As they parsed sentences and memorized verb forms, they were unknowingly honing skills that would serve them far beyond the classroom. The precision required in Latin grammar instilled a sense of order and logic that permeated their thinking. It was a mental gymnasium where young minds flexed and stretched, growing stronger with each challenging exercise. The discipline demanded by Latin grammar was unforgiving. There was no room for ambiguity, no space for loose interpretation. Every word had its place, every ending its purpose. This rigor taught students the value of attention to detail, of perseverance in the face of difficulty. They learned that mastery comes not from fleeting inspiration, but from sustained effort and unwavering focus. In the quiet hours spent poring over textbooks and manuscripts, students discovered a world of intellectual richness. The grammar of Latin opened doors to ancient wisdom, to the thoughts of great thinkers who had shaped Western civilization. It was a key that unlocked the treasures of the past, allowing students to converse with Cicero, to debate with Seneca, to ponder with Plato. The study of Latin grammar was not without its frustrations. Many students struggled with its complexities, feeling lost in a sea of rules and exceptions. Yet even in these moments of difficulty, valuable lessons were learned. They discovered the importance of resilience, of pushing through challenges even when the path seemed unclear. As they progressed, students began to see patterns emerge from the seeming chaos of Latin grammar. They recognized the underlying logic, the beautiful symmetry of a language that had been honed over centuries. This recognition brought with it a sense of accomplishment, a feeling of having unlocked a secret code. The benefits of studying Latin grammar extended far beyond the realm of language. Students found that their ability to analyze and interpret complex texts improved across all subjects. The logical thinking required for Latin translation spilled over into mathematics and science, enhancing problem-solving skills. Moreover, the study of Latin grammar provided a foundation for understanding the structure of language itself. Students gained insights into the mechanics of communication, the ways in which ideas are conveyed and nuances expressed. This deep understanding of language as a system proved invaluable in their study of other tongues, both ancient and modern. Perhaps most importantly, the Latin grammar curriculum instilled in students a sense of connection to the past. As they grappled with the same linguistic challenges that had occupied scholars for millennia, they felt part of a grand intellectual tradition. They were not merely learning a dead language, but participating in the ongoing conversation of human thought. The discipline of Latin grammar also fostered a certain humility. Students learned that even the most brilliant minds could be humbled by a tricky subjunctive or an elusive ablative absolute. This realization taught them the value of persistence, of returning again and again to a problem until it yielded its secrets. As students advanced in their studies, they began to appreciate the nuances and subtleties of Latin grammar. They saw how a slight change in word order could alter the emphasis of a sentence, how the choice of tense could shift the entire meaning of a passage. This sensitivity to linguistic detail carried over into their use of their native tongues, enriching their ability to express themselves with precision and elegance. The study of Latin grammar also cultivated a sense of aesthetic appreciation. Students learned to recognize the beauty in a well-constructed sentence, the harmony in a perfectly balanced period. They developed an ear for rhythm and cadence, skills that would serve them well in their own writing and speaking. For many students, the Latin grammar curriculum was their first encounter with the concept of a systematic approach to knowledge. They learned that even the most complex subjects could be broken down into manageable parts, analyzed, and mastered. This methodical approach to learning became a valuable tool in all areas of their education and beyond. The rigors of Latin grammar also taught students the importance of intellectual honesty. There was no room for vagueness or equivocation in translation. Each word, each grammatical construction, demanded precise interpretation. This insistence on clarity and accuracy fostered a habit of careful thinking that served students well in all their intellectual endeavors. As students progressed through the Latin grammar curricula, they often found themselves developing a deep appreciation for the power of language. They saw how subtle shifts in grammar could dramatically alter meaning, how the choice of words could shape perception. This awareness made them more discerning readers and more effective communicators in their own right. The study of Latin grammar also provided students with a unique perspective on their own languages. As they compared Latin structures to those of their mother tongues, they gained insights into the peculiarities and strengths of both. This comparative approach deepened their understanding of language as a whole and enhanced their ability to express themselves with precision. For many, the Latin grammar curriculum was a transformative experience. It challenged them to think in new ways, to approach problems with rigor and persistence. It taught them the value of tradition and the importance of innovation. It showed them that true learning is not about memorization, but about understanding. In the end, what students gained from their study of Latin grammar was far more than linguistic knowledge. They acquired a set of mental tools that would serve them throughout their lives. They learned to think critically, to analyze carefully, to express themselves clearly. They gained a deeper appreciation for the power of language and the importance of precision in thought and expression. Though many would never write again in Latin, what they learned remained: structure, discipline, the deep, quiet satisfaction of mastering something invisible. In the grammar of Latin, they found more than language, they found thought. Now, the halls of learning lie silent. The once bustling corridors echo only with the whispers of forgotten knowledge. In the depths of these abandoned chambers, where Latin grammar once reigned supreme, a peculiar stillness settles. The sleep of forgotten scholars has descended upon this place, a slumber so profound it seems to stretch across centuries. Dust motes dance in shafts of fading light, illuminating the remnants of a curriculum long since abandoned. Tattered textbooks, their pages yellowed and brittle, rest on shelves like ancient tomes guarding secrets of a lost world. In the quiet of these forsaken classrooms, one can almost hear the ghostly cadence of declensions and conjugations. The air itself seems to hold the memory of countless students, their voices raised in unison as they recited the intricacies of Latin grammar. Amo, amaz, amat, they would chant, the words etching themselves into the very stone of the building. But now, those voices have faded into the mists of time. The blackboards, once covered in chalk dust and meticulous diagrams of sentence structure, stand bare and forgotten. Yet, if you listen closely on a moonlit night, you might catch the faintest whisper of a lesson long past. Quid est nomen? The question seems to float on the air, a remnant of countless drills and exercises. Nomen est pars oration is ... The answer comes, soft as a sigh, from the shadows of memory. In the courtyard, where students once gathered to practice their Latin under the watchful eye of stern professors, nature has begun to reclaim its domain. Ivy creeps along the weathered stone walls, its tendrils reaching towards the sky as if seeking the wisdom that once flowed so freely here. The fountain, once a gathering place for scholarly debates, now stands silent, its waters long since stilled. As twilight descends, the building seems to come alive with the echoes of its past. The creaking of floorboards might be mistaken for the footsteps of a diligent scholar, burning the midnight oil as they pore over complex grammatical structures. The rustling of leaves in the breeze could be the turning of pages in a well-worn textbook. In the headmaster's office, a solitary desk stands as a testament to the authority that once governed this realm of Latin learning. The chair behind it sits empty, yet one can almost see the ghostly outline of the last custodian of this fading tradition. On the desk, a single sheet of paper remains, covered in faded ink, the final lesson plan for a curriculum that time has left behind. As night fully envelops the abandoned school, the moon casts long shadows through the empty windows. In this ethereal light, the ghosts of Latin grammar seem to stir. Verbs and nouns dance in spectral formations, conjugating and declining in an endless waltz of linguistic precision. The library, once a sanctuary of knowledge, now stands as a mausoleum to the printed word. Row upon row of Latin texts line the shelves, their spines cracked and faded. In the silence, one can almost hear the whispered conversations of long-dead authors, Cicero debating Virgil, Ovid reciting his poetry to an audience of dust motes and shadows. Deep in the heart of the building, a single classroom remains untouched by time's relentless march. Here, the desks stand in perfect rows, as if awaiting the return of students long since grown and gone. On the blackboard, a half-erased lesson lingers. Verbum est pars oration is ... The words hang in the air, a final testament to the rigors of Latin grammar. As midnight approaches, a strange phenomena occurs. The very air seems to vibrate with the collective memory of countless lessons. The walls themselves appear to whisper conjugations and declensions, a soft litany of linguistic rules that have stood the test of time. Laudo, laudes, laudit, the whispers grow, filling the empty halls with the ghosts of Latin verbs. Laudamus, laudatus, laudant, the chant builds, echoing through the abandoned corridors, a phantom chorus of voices long silenced. In this moment, it's as if the veil between past and present has thinned. The sleep of forgotten scholars lifts, if only for an instant, and the school comes alive with the memory of its former glory. Shadowy figures move through the halls, their voices raised in the pursuit of perfect Latin grammar. But as quickly as it begins, the moment passes. The whispers fade, the shadows retreat, and the school once again falls into its deep slumber. The ghosts of Latin grammar settle back into their eternal rest, leaving behind only the faintest trace of their presence. As dawn breaks, the first rays of sunlight pierce the gloom, illuminating the abandoned halls. The school stands silent once more, its secrets and memories locked away in the depths of time. Yet for those who know where to look, the echoes of Latin grammar linger still. In the soft light of morning, a single leaf flutters through an open window, coming to rest on the floor of the headmaster's office. On its surface, written in an unseen hand, are the words, Lingua Latina numquam moritur. The Latin language never dies. And so, the cycle continues. The sleep of forgotten scholars may endure, but the legacy of Latin grammar lives on, preserved in the very stones of this abandoned place of learning. For in the hush of certain nights, if you listen closely, you might still hear the faint echo of a voice, softly reciting, Quid est verbum? Verbum est pars oration is ... Sleep now, beneath the echo of ancient grammar, and dream of a time when Latin ruled the halls of academia. For though the scholars may be forgotten, their words live on, a testament to the enduring power of language and the timeless pursuit of knowledge. As we reach the end of our journey through the intricate paths of Latin grammar, perhaps you've found yourself drifting halfway between the ancient world and our modern one. Thank you for traversing this scholarly road with me through the well-worn pages of declensions and the echoes of long silent orators. The study of language does not always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it merely whispers in the quiet corners of our minds, and sometimes that whisper is all we need to unlock the secrets of a civilization long past. We've explored the nuances of noun cases, unraveled the mysteries of verb conjugations, and deciphered the subtle art of Latin syntax. Each step has brought us closer to understanding the very foundation of Western thought and literature. The Latin language, with its precise structure and elegant simplicity, has been our guide through the corridors of time. We've heard the voices of Cicero and Virgil, felt the weight of Caesar's words, and marveled at the poetry of Ovid. As we close this chapter of our Latin studies, remember that the knowledge you've gained is not just about memorizing rules and forms. It's about connecting with the very roots of our cultural heritage, about seeing the world through the eyes of those who came before us. The Latin grammar you've mastered is more than just a set of rules. It's a key that unlocks doors to philosophy, law, science, and art. It's a bridge spanning millennia, connecting us to the thoughts and dreams of countless generations. So as you set aside your textbooks and close your notebooks, know that you carry with you more than just conjugations and declensions. You carry the echoes of a civilization that shaped our world, a language that has whispered through the ages. Let the rhythms of Latin prose and poetry linger in your mind. Let the wisdom of ancient thinkers guide your steps. And let the beauty of this timeless language continue to inspire you long after our lessons have ended. As you go forth, may you find new ways to apply your knowledge, to see the world through the lens of Latin grammar. Perhaps you'll discover connections in unexpected places, or find yourself understanding the roots of words in ways you never imagined. Remember, the study of Latin is not just about looking back. It's about equipping yourself with tools to understand the present and shape the future. The precision and logic you've learned here will serve you well in all your endeavors. And who knows, perhaps one day you'll find yourself passing on this knowledge to others, keeping the flame of classical learning alive for future generations. As we part ways on this grammatical journey, I hope you'll carry with you not just the rules and structures, but the spirit of inquiry and the love of language that Latin embodies. May your future studies be illuminated by the light of ancient wisdom, and may you always find joy in the pursuit of knowledge. So close your eyes, let the cadences of Latin lull you to sleep, and may the ancient words keep you safe until we meet again in another scholarly hour beneath the lamplight of classical learning. Good night.